spring 484 AD, somewhere between Merv and Balkh, in the arid plains of what would later be called Khorasan, King Perros I of the Sassanid Persian Empire watches his world collapse. For 3 days, his army, 100,000 cavalry troops, the largest military expedition Persia has ever mounted against Central Asian opponents. The cream of Sassanid military power, including the elite royal guard and the famous war elephants that symbolize Persian imperial majesty, has been trapped in a valley position where geographical constraints prevent effective deployment of their superior numbers and equipment. The Hephthalites, those Iranian-speaking nomads the Persians dismissively call White Huns, have drawn them into terrain where Persian advantages mean nothing. Around Perros, the evidence of catastrophe accumulates with terrible clarity. His war elephants, those magnificent beasts that have terrorized enemies from India to Anatolia, creatures whose mere presence on battlefields typically breaks enemy morale, are dying, not from glorious combat, but from exhaustion, dehydration, wounds sustained over days of futile charges against nomadic forces that refuse decisive engagement. Picture one of these massive animals, perhaps 12 feet tall, its trunk raised in agony, trumpet calls echoing across the valley as Hephthalite arrows find gaps in its armor. Its mahout, desperately trying to control the panicked creature as it tramples through Persian infantry formations in blind terror. Then the crash as it falls, the ground shaking, another symbol of Persian invincibility reduced to dying flesh and blood. Perros has been king for 27 years. He took the throne in 457 AD, determined to restore Persian authority over Central Asian territories after the humiliating defeats his predecessor, Yazdegerd II, suffered against these same nomadic enemies. He'd spent decades rebuilding Persian military capabilities, implementing systematic reforms, studying nomadic tactics, preparing for this moment. The 484 campaign was supposed to be his triumph, the definitive elimination of Hephthalite power, the restoration of Persian control over the Silk Road trade routes that had enriched his empire for centuries, revenge for a generation of humiliation. Instead, it's become the greatest military disaster in Sassanid history. The Hephthalites haven't defeated the Persian army through superior force or technology. They've defeated it through superior understanding of terrain, climate, and the limitations of conventionally organized armies operating in Central Asian conditions. They avoided the pitched battles where Persian numbers and equipment would be decisive. They harassed supply lines, destroyed water sources, launched night raids that prevented rest, attacked isolated detachments, drew the massive Persian expedition deeper into terrain that favored mobility over mass. And now, after 3 days of increasingly desperate fighting in this valley trap, with supplies running low, horses dying from thirst, men collapsing from exhaustion, the elephants that represented Persian power dying or going mad, now comes the final assault. Hephthalite cavalry lighter, faster, led by commanders who know every feature of this landscape, charge from multiple directions simultaneously. Not the frontal assault Persian tactics are designed to counter, but coordinated attacks, exploiting gaps in defensive formations, targeting command positions, creating chaos that prevents effective response. Perros, surrounded by his bodyguard, understanding that this is the end, makes the decision that will echo through Persian history. He will die fighting rather than surrender to nomadic barbarians. The accounts differ on exactly how it happens. Some say he fell in cavalry combat, others that he was struck down, leading a desperate countercharge, still others that he died when his position was overrun. What's certain is that when the sun sets on that spring day in 484 AD, King Perros I of Persia is dead, along with perhaps half his army. The survivors flee in disorder toward Persian territories, abandoning equipment, treasure, the bodies of their fallen king and comrades. The Hephthalites systematically loot the battlefield, capturing royal regalia, ceremonial weapons, precious metals, scattered across a wide area. Even the famous Persian war elephants, those that survive the battle, are killed or die subsequently from wounds and exhaustion. The catastrophic defeat reshapes the balance of power throughout Central Asia. The Sassanid Empire's eastern frontiers lie virtually defenseless. Hephthalite power reaches its zenith. For the next 80 years, these nomadic warriors who developed sophisticated solutions to governing sedentary populations will dominate the Silk Road, extract tribute from Persia, conquer territories, extending from Central Asia to northern India, and create a cultural synthesis, combining nomadic vigor with sophisticated urban civilization. But to understand how the Hephthalites, a people whose very ethnic origins remain debated by scholars, rose to inflict such catastrophic defeat on one of antiquity's great empires, we must travel back a century to the Altai Mountains of Central Asia, where various nomadic groups were coalescing into what would eventually become the Hephthalite Confederation. The year is 4th century AD, and in the grasslands and mountain valleys, extending from the Irtysh River to the Tian Shan foothills, something new is emerging from the chaos of collapsing empires and migrating peoples. The ethnogenesis of the Hephthalites, the process by which various nomadic groups coalesced into a distinct political and cultural entity, represents one of history's most complex puzzles. Archaeological excavations throughout the Altai Mountains and adjacent steppe regions reveal burial sites containing distinctive grave goods, iron stirrups that would revolutionize mounted warfare, composite bows with bone reinforcements capable of penetrating armor at remarkable distances, bronze belt plaques featuring animal motifs that would become characteristic of Hephthalite material culture. These aren't the artifacts of primitive nomads. These are sophisticated military technologies and artistic traditions, reflecting centuries of cultural development. The linguistic evidence adds crucial dimensions. The limited Hephthalite inscriptions that survive, combined with Bactrian documents found at sites throughout modern Afghanistan, indicate an Iranian-speaking population with possible Turkic substrata influences. Royal names like Toramana and Mihirakula contain elements consistent with Middle Iranian phonological patterns, specifically those found in Sogdian and Bactrian sources from the same period. This linguistic identity becomes crucial for understanding who the Hephthalites actually were and who they were not. Because despite later European chroniclers calling them White Huns, the Hephthalites were fundamentally different from Attila's European Huns, who terrorized Rome during the 5th century. The European Huns were predominantly Turkic-speaking, maintained fluid tribal structures based on personal loyalty to charismatic war leaders like Attila, relied on constant raiding and plunder redistribution to maintain their confederation. Their material culture, revealed through burial sites in Hungary and Romania, shows heavy Germanic and Roman influences. They were intermediaries between the classical Mediterranean world and the Eurasian steppes, cultural chameleons who absorbed elements from everyone they encountered. The Hephthalites were different. They spoke Iranian languages. They developed increasingly centralized political institutions while retaining nomadic military advantages. Their burial practices maintained distinctly Iranian characteristics, the use of ossuaries, fire altars suggesting Zoroastrian or related religious influences, grave goods reflecting continuity with ancient Iranian nomadic traditions. Chinese sources, the Weishu and Beiqi chronicles, consistently distinguish between the Xiongnu Huns and the Yeda Hephthalite, noting fundamental differences in military organization, religious practices, diplomatic protocols, where Attila's Huns relied primarily on light cavalry, armed with composite bows employing hit-and-run tactics, maximizing mobility while avoiding prolonged engagements. The Hephthalites developed heavy cavalry units, equipped with lances, swords, substantial body armor. Archaeological finds reveal iron lamellar armor plates, and long iron spearheads, characteristic of shock cavalry, designed for direct confrontation rather than harassment warfare. This represented tactical revolution nomads, who could not only raid but conquer, not only harass but occupy, not only plunder but administer. The geographical distribution of early Hephthalite archaeological sites extends from the Irtysh Basin in the north to the Tian Shan foothills in the south, encompassing vast grasslands that provided optimal conditions for horse-based pastoralism. Horse burials dating to the late 4th century demonstrate sophisticated breeding practices and the development of cavalry techniques that would later prove decisive. These weren't just transportation animals, these were war horses, selectively bred for size, stamina, temperament, suited for carrying armored riders into shock combat. The traditional pastoral nomadic lifestyle centered on seasonal migrations following established patterns of pasture utilization. Summer camps in highland areas where cooler temperatures and abundant water supported large herds. Winter quarters in sheltered valleys providing protection from harsh weather. Portable dwellings, temporary corrals, specialized equipment for processing dairy products, and preparing preserved meat. The archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated adaptation to demanding environmental conditions. But even during this formative period, transition towards semi-sedentary lifestyles was beginning. Contact with agricultural populations introduced new economic opportunities and technological innovations that gradually modified traditional nomadic practices. Some Hephthalite families maintained permanent residences in Sogdian trading cities while continuing to manage pastoral activities in surrounding regions. This hybrid economic strategy, combining animal husbandry with agricultural production and craft specialization, required permanent installations and skilled labor forces that purely nomadic lifestyles couldn't support. Workshops for metalworking, textile production, ceramic manufacture appeared in proto-Hephthalite settlements. These activities demanded stable populations, accumulated capital, technical expertise transmitted across generations. The political implications were profound. Semi-sedentary communities required more complex administrative structures than tribal councils could provide. The stage was set for transformation from loose nomadic confederation into something unprecedented in Central Asian history, a nomadic empire capable of systematic territorial control. The westward migration that would carry proto-Hephthalite groups from their Altai homeland toward the wealthy sedentary civilizations of Transoxiana occurred during a period of significant climatic and political upheaval. Paleoclimatic data ice core samples. Pollen analysis indicates cooling trends beginning in the late 4th century that reduced pasture quality across the northern steppes. The grass that sustained nomadic herds grew sparser. Water sources became less reliable. The carrying capacity of traditional grazing lands declined, creating pressure for migration toward more favorable territories. Simultaneously, Chinese military activity along northern frontiers intensified. The Northern Wei dynasty, established by Tuoba tribal confederations that had successfully conquered northern China, was consolidating its frontier defenses and displacing numerous nomadic groups westward. For proto-Hephthalite populations caught between environmental degradation and Chinese military pressure, westward migration wasn't opportunistic expansion, it was survival necessity. The migration pattern followed established nomadic routes, but occurred on unprecedented scale. Archaeological evidence traces the movement through a series of temporary settlements, extending from the Balkhash region through the Zarafshan Valley. These intermediate sites reveal occupation layers containing artifacts bridging early Altai material culture and later Hephthalite styles in Bactria and Gandhara, evidence of gradual adaptation as nomadic groups encountered new environmental conditions and established relationships with sedentary populations. The westward movement gained momentum during the early 5th century as Hephthalite groups encountered the weakening Kushan territories in Bactria. The Kushan Empire, which had once controlled vast territories from Central Asia to northern India, facilitating Buddhist religious and artistic transmission while growing wealthy from Silk Road trade, had been fragmenting for over a century. By 400 AD, various local rulers claimed Kushan legitimacy while exercising practical independence over shrinking domains. This political fragmentation created power vacuum that attracted nomadic groups seeking new pastures and opportunities for tribute extraction. Chinese sources describe this period as one of constant warfare between competing nomadic confederations, with the Hephthalites gradually establishing dominance through superior military organization and diplomatic skill. They weren't the only nomadic group moving west. The Kittites had already established control over much of Bactria, but the Hephthalites brought organizational innovations that would prove decisive. Their social organization during migration reflected complex demands of managing large-scale population movements while maintaining military effectiveness. Extended kinship groups each controlled specific herds and territorial segments. Burial sites from this transitional period reveal increasing wealth differentiation. Elite graves containing imported goods from China, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire, alongside traditional nomadic equipment, while common burials show more modest assemblages. This wealth stratification indicates emerging hierarchies that would form the foundation for later centralized authority. But the most significant development during this migration period was the continued evolution towards semi-sedentary adaptation. Contact with Sogdian cities, those wealthy trading centers that served as commercial hubs along the Silk Road, introduced Hephthalite leaders to the enormous wealth that could be extracted through systematic control rather than simple raiding. A merchant caravan could be raided once for its goods, but if you controlled the territory through which that caravan passed, you could tax it every time it traveled, generating sustainable revenue streams that funded permanent military forces, administrative structures, diplomatic activities. Archaeological evidence from Panjikent and other Sogdian cities reveals Hephthalite quarters where nomadic families maintained permanent residences while continuing pastoral activities in surrounding regions. These communities established workshops, participated in local commerce, intermarried with sedentary populations, creating cultural and economic bridges between nomadic and urban worlds. The implications extended far beyond simple economic calculation. Permanent urban quarters required protection from rivals, necessitating standing military forces. Craft production required raw materials, skilled workers, commercial networks creating dependencies on stable political conditions. Agricultural investments tied specific kinship groups to particular territories, reducing mobility that had historically been nomadic peoples' primary strategic advantage. The Hephthalites were sacrificing traditional nomadic flexibility for the wealth and power that territorial control could provide. Whether this represented brilliant adaptation or fatal compromise would be tested in the coming decades as they confronted the established powers controlling Central Asian wealth, the Kittirite Confederation in Bactria, and beyond them, the mighty Sassanid Persian Empire that had dominated the region for centuries. By 440 AD, the transformation was nearly complete. Various nomadic groups, occupying territories from the Amu Darya to the Hindu Kush, were adopting standardized burial practices, weaponry designs, administrative seals, indicating centralized authority. The age of tribal fragmentation was ending. The age of Hephthalite imperial power was beginning. The consolidation process that transformed scattered nomadic groups into a unified Hephthalite political entity occurred through systematic campaigns between 445 and 460 AD that eliminated rival claimants to regional authority. This wasn't gentle federation, this was conquest. Archaeological evidence from Termez reveals systematic urban reconstruction following military operations, deliberate demolition of existing structures, construction using standardized architectural techniques, ceramic assemblages, blending local traditions with new forms distributed across multiple sites. The uniformity of these material culture changes across vast distances indicates centralized administrative control, extending far beyond simple military occupation. The absorption of smaller confederations involved military conquest, diplomatic marriage alliances, economic incentives, whatever worked for specific circumstances. Chinese sources describe sieges against fortified settlements rather than traditional nomadic raids, indicating the Hephthalites had already developed capabilities for sustained territorial occupation. They weren't just defeating enemies, they were replacing existing political structures with their own administrative systems. The strategic positioning along critical Silk Road segments became the foundation of Hephthalite power. Control of the Bamiyan Pass provided access to the lucrative trade route connecting Bactria with Gandhara and the Indian subcontinent. Archaeological surveys identify numerous caravanserai foundations dating to the mid-5th century, standardized architectural plans with defensive walls, storage facilities, accommodation quarters that could house large merchant expeditions. These weren't random constructions. This was systematic infrastructure development designed to facilitate and tax commercial traffic. The tribute systems implemented represented significant departure from traditional nomadic raiding. Rather than sporadic attacks on merchant caravans, the Hephthalites established permanent taxation points where commercial expeditions paid fixed fees in exchange for safe passage and protection services. Bactrian documents discovered at Tochi Tope include receipts detailing these arrangements, payment schedules based on cargo types, with silk and precious metals subject to higher rates than bulk commodities. This required literate administrators, standardized weights conforming to both Chinese and Persian measurement systems, dispute resolution procedures acceptable to diverse trading partners. The Hephthalites were becoming bureaucrats as much as warriors, but the military innovations during this period proved equally crucial. The development of heavy cavalry capable of shock charges rather than just harassment tactics required specialized equipment, iron lance heads measuring over 2 meters in length, lamellar armor, adapted from Chinese military technology, but modified for mounted combat, lighter yet more durable than contemporary Persian or Byzantine equivalents. This wasn't equipment you could manufacture while moving seasonal camps. This required permanent workshops, specialized forges, timber working areas with precision carpentry capabilities. The development of siege warfare capabilities represented perhaps the most significant advancement. Excavations at Balkh uncovered workshop foundations specifically designed for constructing siege engines, specialized forges for large iron components, timber working areas, evidence of engineering expertise that rivaled anything Persia or Byzantium could produce. Archaeological layers dating to 450 to 470 AD reveal systematic destruction of urban fortifications, followed by reconstruction, indicating the Hephthalites had acquired effective methods for reducing fortified positions. These capabilities would prove essential for the next phase of Hephthalite expansion, the conquest of Bactria and displacement of the Kedarite confederation that had established dominance over those wealthy territories during the early 5th century. The Kedarites, named for their ruler Kedar, had successfully transitioned from nomadic raiders to territorial administrators, making their displacement a complex undertaking requiring sustained military pressure and sophisticated tactical coordination. By 450 AD, archaeological evidence reveals intensive military preparations along the Amu Darya, construction of forward supply depots, weapons manufacturing facilities, cavalry training grounds indicating coordinated planning for large-scale operations against fortified positions. Workshop complexes contain specialized equipment for siege warfare, iron working facilities capable of producing massive projectile points, and structural components required for catapult construction. The systematic nature of these preparations indicates the Hephthalites understood they weren't just fighting another nomadic confederation. They were attempting to conquer an established territorial state with significant defensive capabilities and economic resources. The campaign would test everything they'd learned about combining nomadic military advantages with sedentary siege techniques. The stakes were enormous. Success would provide the Hephthalites with control over some of the wealthiest territories in Central Asia, establishing them as a major power capable of confronting even the Sasanian Persian Empire. Failure would leave them vulnerable to counterattack, while demonstrating the limits of nomadic adaptation to territorial warfare. The decisive phase was approaching. The initial Hephthalite operations against Kitterite positions began with systematic attacks on outlying settlements and trade route control points, disrupting economic resources while avoiding prolonged sieges of heavily fortified positions. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Bamiyan-Balkh corridor shows destruction layers dating to 450 to 455 AD, burned storage facilities, scattered weapon fragments, hasty burial deposits containing valuable goods. These patterns indicate rapid military strikes designed to isolate Kitterite strongholds from mutual support, forcing defenders to rely on stored supplies while preventing reinforcement or resupply operations. The Hephthalites employed their superior mobility to devastating effect, striking multiple targets simultaneously, withdrawing before Kitterite forces could concentrate for counterattack, maintaining constant pressure that prevented effective defensive coordination. This wasn't the cavalry warfare of traditional nomadic raiding. This was sophisticated operational planning, designed to create conditions for successful siege operations against major urban centers. The siege of Balkh itself, the ancient city that served as both Kitterite administrative capital and commercial hub for trans-Hindu Kush trade networks, required innovations in assault techniques that demonstrated Hephthalite adaptation of sedentary military technologies. The city's defensive perimeter reveals systematic attempts to undermine wall foundations through tunneling operations, collapsed sections with characteristic subsidence patterns, discovery of iron mining tools in debris layers, projectile distributions around walls indicate coordinated artillery bombardments using torsion engines capable of launching stone projectiles weighing over 50 kilograms. The concentration near gate structures suggests targeted attacks designed to breach specific defensive points rather than general destructive bombardment. Picture the scene during those weeks of siege in 457 AD. Hephthalite engineers, some recruited from conquered Sogdian cities, others trained through observation of Persian and Chinese techniques, directing the construction of massive siege engines. Timber towers rising level with Balkh's walls, providing platforms for archers to suppress defenders, battering rams covered with wet hides to resist fire arrows, mining teams working underground, propping tunnel roofs with timber that would later be burned to collapse wall sections, catapults launching stones that crash into defensive structures with earth-shaking impacts, and inside Balkh, the Kitterite defenders watching their supplies dwindle, their water sources controlled by besiegers, their communications cut, understanding that relief isn't coming because Hephthalite cavalry has systematically eliminated every Kitterite force attempting to break the siege. The fall of Balkh marked a decisive turning point, but archaeological evidence suggests the transition occurred through negotiated surrender rather than total destruction. Excavation layers show minimal urban destruction outside immediate vicinity of military installations. Residential and commercial districts reveal continuity in occupation patterns and material culture. Administrative buildings contain archives spanning the transition period. The Hephthalites maintained existing bureaucratic structures while installing their own oversight personnel. This approach reflected sophisticated understanding of territorial administration requirements. Why destroy a functioning city that could generate tribute? Why eliminate administrative expertise that could be co-opted? The Hephthalites weren't interested in ruins, they wanted productive territories under their control. The displacement of Kitterite leadership involved systematic elimination of rival authority structures while preserving productive economic activities. Elite burial sites, dating to this transition period, reveal sudden cessation of traditional Kitterite royal burial practices, replaced by simpler interments, lacking elaborate grave goods and monumental construction. Conversely, contemporary Hephthalite elite burials show increased wealth accumulation and adoption of Bactrian luxury goods, successful appropriation of regional economic resources. Coin hoards buried during this period contain mixtures of Kitterite and early Hephthalite issues, suggesting currency systems remained functional during political transition. The expansion beyond Balkh required securing critical mountain passes connecting Bactrian territories with the Indian subcontinent and eastern trade networks. The Hindu-Kush mountain system presented formidable geographical obstacles that had historically limited large-scale military operations between Central Asia and Gandharan regions. But these same passes represented choke points where relatively small forces could control vast commercial networks, making their capture essential for sustained territorial expansion. The Bamiyan Pass, connecting the Bactrian Plateau with the Kabul River Valley, became the primary focus due to its central position in trans-regional trade networks. Archaeological evidence reveals intensive construction beginning around 460 AD. Establishment of permanent military garrisons, administrative facilities, commercial infrastructure designed to support increased traffic volumes. The famous Buddhist monastery complexes at Bamiyan received significant patronage during this period. Construction phases incorporating Hephthalite architectural elements while maintaining traditional Buddhist decorative programs. This wasn't religious devotion alone. This was strategic recognition that maintaining religious continuity ensured local population cooperation. Control of the Khyber Pass required more complex operations due to existing tribal confederations that had maintained independence from both Kitterite and earlier Kushan authority. Archaeological evidence reveals negotiated agreements rather than direct military conquest. Construction of shared defensive installations. Establishment of tribute collection points operated jointly by Hephthalite officials and local tribal leaders. This demonstrated sophisticated diplomatic capabilities, enabling territorial expansion without massive military commitments required for total occupation of mountainous regions. The strategic importance of controlling mountain trade routes extended far beyond simple tribute collection. Archaeological analysis of commercial goods at Hephthalite sites reveals dramatic increases in volume and variety of luxury imports following conquest of Hindu Kush passes, silk fragments from Chinese workshops, precious stones from Sri Lankan sources, spices from Southeast Asian origins, appearing in significantly greater quantities in post-conquest layers. The Hephthalites had successfully integrated their territories into existing long-distance trade networks while extracting substantial economic benefits through taxation and direct commercial participation. The establishment of Balkh as capital required extensive urban reconstruction, reflecting evolving Hephthalite political and cultural identity. Systematic demolition of Kitterite palace complexes was followed by construction of new royal quarters, incorporating architectural elements from multiple cultural traditions. Throne room complex, featuring central audience hall, with Persian-style Iwan construction, Chinese-influenced decorative tile work, Indian sculptural elements demonstrating cosmopolitan character of Hephthalite court culture. Storage facilities adjacent to the palace contained standardized containers for tribute goods, suggesting systematic organization of wealth accumulation and redistribution. The administrative quarter incorporated specialized buildings for different governmental functions, reflecting complexity of territorial administration. Treasury facilities with multiple vault chambers, archive buildings with climate-controlled storage for documents, judicial complexes with formal courtrooms and detention facilities. The mint facility expanded significantly, producing coins with distinctly Hephthalite iconography, while maintaining weight standards compatible with existing trade networks. These installations demonstrate the Hephthalites had developed sophisticated understanding of governmental requirements for managing large territorial states. The decision to establish a secondary capital at Bamiyan reflected strategic considerations related to controlling trans-Hindu Kush communications and maintaining military pressure on Gandharan territories. The fortified palace complex, positioned to oversee the critical pass route, incorporated natural cave formations enhanced with constructed facades, creating defensive positions that could withstand prolonged sieges while maintaining communication capabilities with other Hephthalite centers. Workshop areas produced military equipment and luxury goods, indicating self-sufficiency during periods of isolation. But even as the Hephthalites consolidated their control over Bactria and the Hindu Kush passes, establishing administrative systems and extracting wealth from Silk Road commerce, their expansion inevitably brought them into confrontation with the power that had dominated Central Asian politics for centuries, the Sassanid Persian Empire. And the Persians were watching developments along their eastern frontiers with growing alarm. The initial tensions emerged around 440 AD, when Hephthalite expansion disrupted established tribute arrangements that had provided the Sassanids with regular payments from Kushan's successor states and various nomadic confederations. Persian cities along the eastern frontier, Merv, Nishapur, reveal hasty defensive preparations during this period. Reinforcement of existing walls, construction of additional watchtowers, establishment of supply depots designed to support prolonged military operations in frontier regions. King Yazdegerd II, who ruled the Sassanid Empire from 438 to 457 AD, initially attempted diplomatic negotiations that would have maintained traditional tribute relationships while acknowledging Hephthalite territorial gains. Persian administrative documents describe embassy exchanges where Sassanid officials offered recognition of Hephthalite authority over Bactrian territories in exchange for continued tribute payments and guarantees of trade route security. But archaeological evidence suggests the Hephthalites had already begun systematic military preparations, indicating their intention to expand westward into traditional Sassanid spheres of influence rather than accepting subordinate status. The first significant military confrontation occurred in 451 AD, when Hephthalite forces launched coordinated attacks against Sassanid frontier positions in Khorasan. Archaeological excavations at Tus and other border settlements reveal destruction layers, scattered weapons, burned storage facilities, hasty coin hoards, indicating rapid military strikes designed to test Sassanid defensive capabilities. The attack pattern suggests the Hephthalites employed traditional mobility advantages to strike multiple targets simultaneously, preventing coordinated Sassanid responses while gathering intelligence about enemy military preparations and defensive weaknesses. This was reconnaissance in force, probing for vulnerabilities that could be exploited in larger operations. Yazdegerd II's response demonstrated the Sassanid Empire's continued military effectiveness despite internal political pressures and resource constraints imposed by simultaneous conflicts with Byzantine forces in the west. Military production centers at Isfahan and other Iranian cities reveals intensive weapons manufacturing, production of specialized armor designed for cavalry operations in Central Asian terrain, advanced steelworking techniques producing blades superior to contemporary Hephthalite equivalents. Though the nomadic forces compensated for equipment disadvantages through superior tactical mobility and knowledge of local geographical conditions, the 453 AD campaign represented Yazdegerd's most ambitious attempt to restore Sassanid authority over disputed frontier regions. Contemporary sources describe a massive military expedition, including over 50,000 cavalry troops, substantial infantry formations, siege train equipped with latest Roman-inspired artillery technologies. The scale of preparations was staggering. Temporary workshop complexes for equipment maintenance, vast storage facilities for supplies and fodder, specialized corrals, accommodating thousands of horses, required for sustained cavalry operations in desert and steppe environments. The Sassanid army's advance into Hephthalite territory initially achieved significant tactical successes through superior organization and equipment quality. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites along the Murghab River reveals Sassanid tactical formations that effectively combined heavy cavalry charges with coordinated archery volleys and infantry support. Weapon distributions indicate successful employment of famous cataphract cavalry units, heavily armored horsemen, equipped with long lances and comprehensive protection for both rider and mount. These formations proved effective in direct confrontations, where superior armor and disciplined tactics could be brought to bear. But the Hephthalites avoided decisive battles whenever possible, instead employing harassment tactics that exploited superior knowledge of local terrain and climate conditions. Archaeological surveys of the campaign route reveal systematic destruction of water sources, granary facilities, fodder supplies, forcing the Sassanid expedition to rely increasingly on their own logistical resources. The nomadic forces established temporary camps in defensible positions that could be rapidly abandoned when faced with superior enemy forces, while maintaining constant pressure through night raids and attacks on isolated detachments. Picture the frustration for Sassanid commanders. They'd assembled this massive expedition, equipped it with the finest weapons Persian workshops could produce, organized supply trains capable of supporting operations deep in enemy territory, and the enemy refused to fight. Every time Sassanid forces approached what seemed like a Hephthalite position, they found abandoned camps. Every water source they needed had been poisoned or destroyed. Every supply depot they sought had been burned. Their horses were dying from lack of fodder. Their men were exhausted from constant night raids preventing sleep, and they still hadn't fought the decisive battle that Persian tactical doctrine was designed for. The decisive engagement occurred near modern Herat, where geographical constraints forced both armies into direct confrontation. Archaeological excavations reveal evidence of complex tactical maneuvering, lasting several days before the main engagement. The Hephthalites succeeded in drawing Sassanid forces into a valley position where numerical and equipment advantages couldn't be fully utilized. Weapon distributions indicate intense close-quarters combat, with significant casualties on both sides, but the Hephthalites ultimately prevailed through superior stamina and ability to receive reinforcements from nearby tribal allies. The aftermath marked fundamental shift in power balance. Sassanid frontier cities reveal systematic defensive improvements implemented immediately following military defeat. Construction of additional fortifications, establishment of permanent garrison facilities, development of early warning systems designed to provide advance notice of nomadic raids. Coin hoards show evidence of economic disruption as resources were diverted from commercial activities to military preparations. But Yazdegerd II died in 457 AD before he could organize another major expedition. His successor, Perros I, inherited an empire with damaged prestige, depleted resources, and an eastern frontier that remained vulnerable to Hephthalite pressure. Perros had gained considerable military experience during earlier conflicts and possessed detailed knowledge of Central Asian warfare conditions. He was determined to succeed where his predecessor had failed. The renewed conflict began with Peroz's 465 AD expedition, which employed modified tactical approaches based on lessons learned from Yazdegerd's failures. Rather than attempting to occupy Hephthalite territory directly, Sassanid forces focused on establishing fortified bases that could serve as staging areas for sustained raiding operations. Archaeological excavations at Merv and other sites reveal construction of substantial fortress complexes designed to accommodate large cavalry forces while providing secure storage for supplies and equipment. These installations featured sophisticated defensive architecture, incorporating both Persian engineering expertise and adaptations to local environmental conditions. The Hephthalite response demonstrated their own military evolution and increasing sophistication in conducting territorial warfare. Systematic development of counter-fortifications designed to neutralize Sassanid advance bases while maintaining nomadic mobility advantages. These installations featured underground storage facilities that could supply extended siege operations, along with escape routes, allowing defenders to evacuate if positions became untenable. The Hephthalites also developed specialized siege techniques adapted to desert fortress conditions, including use of fire arrows and incendiary devices targeting wooden defensive structures. The prolonged nature of this phase produced significant innovations in military technology and tactics on both sides. Sassanid workshops began producing specialized equipment for extended operations in arid environments. Improved water containers, desert-adapted horse equipment, clothing providing protection from both climate extremes and enemy weapons. Hephthalite sites reveal parallel developments: adoption of Sassanid metallurgical techniques for producing superior armor and weapons, development of logistical systems supporting larger military formations for extended periods. The economic impact of sustained warfare placed increasing pressure on both empires to achieve decisive results. Sassanid taxation records indicate substantial increases in tribute demands imposed on eastern provinces to fund continued military operations. Hephthalite territories reveal similar economic strain: reduced luxury imports, evidence of resource conservation measures in major population centers. These pressures created incentives for both sides to seek decisive confrontations rather than continuing expensive patterns of raid and counter-raid. By the early 480s, both empires were preparing for final reckoning. Peroz was assembling the largest military expedition in Sassanid history, over 100,000 troops, the empire's most elite units, those famous war elephants that symbolized Persian imperial power. The Hephthalites were coordinating defensive preparations across territories extending from the Hindu Kush to the Caspian Sea, uniting previously independent tribal groups under centralized military command. Everything they'd built over the past half-century, the conquered territories, the tribute systems, the semi-sedentary adaptations, the military innovations would be tested in the coming confrontation. And in the spring of 484 AD, near that valley between Merv and Balkh, the armies would finally meet for the battle that would determine Central Asian supremacy for the next century. The 484 AD campaign began with Peroz's systematic assembly of forces, representing the largest military expedition ever mounted by the Sassanid Empire against Central Asian opponents. Contemporary sources describe an army exceeding 100,000 troops, including elite guard units, provincial levies, allied contingents from various client kingdoms. The scale of preparations was staggering. Temporary cities constructed near Nishapur to house the expedition during final organization phases, workshop complexes producing specialized equipment including siege engines designed for reducing nomadic fortifications and extensive supplies of arrows, lances, consumable military items. The Sassanid battle plan involved coordinated advances along multiple routes, designed to prevent Hephthalite forces from concentrating their defensive efforts. 3 primary advance corridors, each supported by substantial supply trains and equipped with independent siege capabilities, sophisticated strategic planning, accounting for both geographical constraints and enemy tactical preferences. The central column, commanded by Peroz, personally included the empire's most elite military units, along with the royal war elephants that had historically proven effective against nomadic cavalry formations. Picture those elephants, massive Indian bulls, each standing 12 feet at the shoulder, weighing several tons, their tusks reinforced with bronze caps, wooden howdahs on their backs carrying archers and javelin throwers. These creatures had terrified enemies from the Indus to Anatolia. Their trumpeting calls, their inexorable advance, the sheer mass of flesh and muscle crushing anyone who stood before them. They were weapons of psychological warfare as much as physical destruction. The Sassanid soldiers who marched alongside them felt invincible. The Hephthalite response demonstrated remarkable strategic coordination, uniting previously independent tribal groups under centralized military command. Systematic preparation of defensive positions throughout anticipated battle zones, construction of hidden supply caches, establishment of communication networks using signal fires and mounted messengers, coordination of tribal military contributions from regions extending from Caspian Sea to Hindu Kush Mountains. The scale of preparations indicates the Hephthalites recognized the existential nature of Peroz's threat. This wasn't another border raid. This was attempted annihilation. The decisive battle occurred in the region between Merv and Balkh, where geographical features channeled advancing Sassanid forces into terrain, favoring Hephthalite tactical preferences. For days, the armies maneuvered. The Hephthalites refused the decisive battle Persian doctrine demanded, instead drawing the massive expedition deeper into territory where their advantages in mobility and terrain knowledge could be maximized. They destroyed water sources. They poisoned wells. They burned fodder supplies. They launched night raids preventing rest. They attacked isolated detachments. And slowly, inexorably, they drew the Persian army into the trap. Day 1. The main engagement began when Peroz, frustrated by weeks of fruitless maneuvering, committed his forces to a valley approach that seemed to offer access to a Hephthalite position. But the valley was a trap. As Sassanid columns entered, Hephthalite cavalry appeared on the ridges above, not charging, just watching. Arrows knocked, waiting. The Persians tried to deploy into battle formations, but the narrow valley constrained their movements. The elephants, those magnificent weapons, struggled in the confined space, their handlers unable to maneuver them effectively. Then came the Hephthalite arrows. Not massed volleys designed to break formations through sheer volume, but carefully aimed shots targeting officers, elephant handlers, horses. Men fell from saddles. Elephants trumpeted in pain and confusion. Chaos spread through the cramped valley as units lost coordination. By nightfall, both armies occupied positions within the valley system. The Sassanids held the floor, the Hephthalites the surrounding heights. Neither could disengage without exposing themselves to devastating attacks. The battle everyone had anticipated, the decisive confrontation that would determine Central Asian supremacy, had become a siege without walls, a trap with no escape. Day 2. The Sassanids attempted coordinated breakout attacks designed to clear the heights and open escape routes. But every assault up the steep valley walls was met with concentrated archery from defenders who knew every feature of the terrain. Persian casualties mounted. The elephants, stressed by combat, lacking adequate water and fodder, became increasingly difficult to control. One went berserk after taking multiple arrow wounds, trampling through its own supporting infantry before collapsing. The psychological impact was devastating. If even the mighty war elephants could be brought down, what hope did mortal men have? Day 3. By the morning of the third day, the situation had become catastrophic. Persian supplies were nearly exhausted. The horses were dying from thirst and exhaustion. The men had been fighting or defending positions for 3 days without adequate rest. The elephants that survived were in terrible condition, wounded, dehydrated, traumatized by constant combat. Some refused to move despite their handlers' desperate efforts. Others showed signs of panic at the slightest provocation. King Peroz I, watching his army disintegrate despite superior numbers and equipment, understood he faced choices that would define his legacy: order retreat and accept humiliating defeat that would destroy Persian prestige throughout Central Asia, attempt to negotiate terms that might preserve some remnant of his army while acknowledging Hephthalite superiority, or die fighting to preserve his personal honor even as his empire's eastern frontiers collapsed. For a Sassanid king, a ruler claiming descent from ancient Persian imperial lineages, a man who'd spent 27 years trying to restore Persian dominance over Central Asia, surrender to nomadic barbarians was unthinkable. The final Hephthalite assault came at midday, when the sun blazed overhead and exhausted Persian soldiers struggled to maintain defensive positions they'd held for 3 days. Coordinated cavalry charges from multiple directions simultaneously, exploiting gaps in Persian formations, targeting command positions, creating chaos that prevented effective response. The Hephthalite commanders had studied Persian tactical doctrine through decades of conflict. They knew how cataphract cavalry units deployed, how infantry formations provided mutual support, how the elephants were positioned to maximize psychological impact, and they designed their final assault to exploit every vulnerability. Peroz, surrounded by his royal bodyguard, led a desperate countercharge, attempting to break through Hephthalite lines and create escape routes for surviving troops. Picture the aging king, 50 years old, 27 years on the throne, a lifetime of military experience, riding at the head of his elite guards, his royal standard flying, his ornate armor glinting in harsh sunlight. Around him, the sounds of battle reached crescendo: the screaming of wounded horses, the trumpeting of dying elephants, the clash of weapons, the war cries of Hephthalite warriors sensing final victory. The exact circumstances of Peroz's death remain debated. Some sources claim he fell in cavalry combat, struck down by Hephthalite lance. Others say he was killed when his position was overrun, fighting to the last against overwhelming numbers. Still, others suggest he died when his horse stumbled during the desperate charge, throwing him to the ground where enemy warriors finished him. What's certain is the result. When the sun set on that spring day in 484 AD, King Peroz I of Persia was dead. Perhaps half his army, 50,000 men, were casualties. The survivors fled in disorder toward Persian territories, abandoning equipment, treasure, supply trains, the bodies of their king and fallen comrades. The systematic looting that followed the Sassanid defeat scattered high-value items across wide areas: royal regalia that had symbolized Persian authority, ceremonial weapons passed down through generations, precious metal decorations stripped from fallen nobles. The recovery of elephant bones from multiple locations indicates that even the famous Sassanid war elephants, symbols of imperial power that had terrorized enemies for centuries, were killed during battle or died subsequently from killed, wounds, and exhaustion. Not one survived to return to Persia. The immediate consequences extended far beyond simple military defeat to encompass fundamental changes in Sassanid Eastern policy and territorial administration. Major Persian cities experienced economic disruption as news of catastrophe triggered hoarding behaviors, currency devaluation, suspension of long-distance trade relationships. Emergency taxation measures were implemented to fund defensive preparations as Hephthalite forces exploited their victory through systematic raiding of previously secure Sassanid territories. But the psychological impact was perhaps most devastating. For over 4 centuries, the Sassanid Empire had dominated Central Asian politics. They'd extracted tribute from nomadic confederations, controlled Silk Road trade routes, projected power from the Mediterranean to the borders of India. Their military reputation, built through campaigns against Romans, Byzantines, various steppe peoples, had made them seem invincible. And now, a nomadic confederation that hadn't even existed as unified political entity a century earlier had annihilated the largest military expedition Persia had ever mounted. The balance of power had shifted decisively. The catastrophic defeat of Perros I in 484 AD left Sassanid eastern frontiers virtually defenseless, creating unprecedented opportunities for Hephthalite expansion beyond their traditional Central Asian territories. And the direction of that expansion was clear: southward, through the Hindu Kush passes they already controlled, into the wealthy lands of Gandhara and the Punjab territories that had been paying tribute to the declining Gupta Empire but were now ripe for conquest by the ascendant nomadic power. The Indian subcontinent was about to experience the full force of Hephthalite military might, and the man who would lead that conquest, Toramana, was preparing campaigns that would carry Hephthalite power to its maximum territorial extent while creating cultural synthesis, combining nomadic vigor with sophisticated Indian civilization. The initial Hephthalite probes into Gandharan territories began around 485 AD, with intensive military preparations revealed through archaeological evidence along the Kabul River Valley. Construction of forward supply bases, weapons manufacturing facilities, cavalry training grounds, specifically designed for operations in monsoon-affected terrain of the Indian subcontinent. Excavations at Bagram uncovered workshop complexes containing specialized equipment for producing lighter armor suitable for humid climates, along with modifications to traditional nomadic weapons, adapting them for combat against Indian military formations employing war elephants and dense infantry phalanxes. The political landscape they encountered was complex, fragmented among numerous local rulers, maintaining nominal allegiance to declining Gupta Empire, while exercising practical independence over regional domains. Archaeological layers from Taxila dating to this period reveal hasty defensive preparations, reinforcement of existing fortifications, establishment of emergency supply caches, suggesting local authorities recognized growing threat from Hephthalite forces massing beyond Hindu Kush passes. Coin hoards, buried during this transition, contain mixtures of late Gupta issues, local imitations, early Hephthalite pieces, currency systems, remaining functional despite increasing political instability. The conquest of Gandhara required systematic campaigns demonstrating Hephthalite adaptation to unique military challenges posed by Indian warfare traditions. Unlike previous conflicts with Persian forces involving primarily cavalry engagements in arid terrain, operations in the Indian subcontinent demanded new tactical approaches for dealing with monsoon conditions, river crossings, fortified cities, constructed using sophisticated engineering techniques developed over centuries. Archaeological evidence from siege sites reveals specialized equipment, waterproofed siege engines, pontoon bridge components, drainage systems designed to maintain cavalry effectiveness during seasonal flooding. The capture of Peshawar around 490 AD marked the first major Hephthalite success in establishing permanent control over significant Indian urban center. Systematic urban reconstruction incorporated both practical, administrative requirements and symbolic demonstrations of new political authority. Existing Buddhist stupa complexes received continued patronage construction phases, adding Hephthalite architectural elements while maintaining traditional Buddhist decorative programs. Administrative quarters featured specialized buildings for tribute collection, including secure storage facilities and workshops for evaluating precious goods received from subordinate territories throughout Gandharan region. This pragmatic approach, preserving functioning institutions while asserting new authority, would characterize Hephthalite rule throughout their Indian territories. The expansion into Punjab brought Hephthalites into direct confrontation with Gupta imperial forces for the first time. Archaeological evidence from battle sites along the Ravi River reveals scale and intensity of these engagements. Weapon distributions, indicating large-scale cavalry battles involving thousands of participants. Gupta forces employed traditional Indian military formations, including war elephant units, disciplined infantry phalanxes, cavalry contingents, equipped with steel weapons, produced in famous metallurgical centers of central India. The clash represented collision between two sophisticated military traditions, Indian emphasis on coordinated infantry and elephants versus nomadic reliance on cavalry, mobility, and archery. Toramana's emergence as dominant Hephthalite leader during the 490s coincided with systematic campaigns demonstrating sophisticated understanding of Indian political and military conditions. Archaeological evidence from his reign reveals establishment of permanent administrative centers at strategic locations throughout conquered territories, Sialkot, Mathura, eventually Malwa, each featuring standardized architectural plans, facilitating efficient territorial administration. Royal inscriptions from this period, carved in both Brahmi script and Bactrian language, demonstrate Toramana's adoption of Indian royal titles, while maintaining distinctly Hephthalite cultural identity and administrative practices. This wasn't wholesale cultural conversion. This was selective adoption of legitimizing elements from Indian political theory, while preserving nomadic institutional foundations. The siege of Mathura in 500 AD represented perhaps the most significant military achievement of Toramana's campaigns. This ancient city had served as crucial stronghold controlling access routes between Gangetic Plain and northwestern India for over a millennium. Archaeological excavations reveal evidence of prolonged siege operations lasting several months, with systematic approaches combining traditional nomadic mobility with adapted siege techniques learned from previous conflicts with Persian forces. Picture the scene. Hephthalite engineers directing construction of siege towers, battering rams, artillery engines around Mathura's walls, cavalry units maintaining blockade, preventing resupply or reinforcement, mining teams working to undermine defensive fortifications, and inside, defenders watching supplies dwindle, understanding relief isn't coming because Toramana's forces control all approach routes. The city's eventual surrender occurred through negotiated terms, preserving much existing urban infrastructure while installing Hephthalite administrative oversight, pragmatic policies designed to maintain economic productivity rather than impose wholesale cultural transformation. The integration of Mathura into Hephthalite administrative system required careful balance between maintaining control and preserving the city's crucial role in regional trade networks. Continuation of traditional craft production, including famous Mathuran sculptural workshops that had produced Buddhist and Hindu religious art for centuries. Construction of new administrative facilities designed to accommodate Hephthalite governmental requirements. Treasury buildings with multiple vault chambers, archive facilities with climate-controlled storage for documents, judicial complexes featuring both traditional Indian legal procedures and nomadic customary practices. This hybrid approach became characteristic of Hephthalite administration throughout Indian territories. The expansion of Hephthalite control throughout Punjab proceeded through combination of military conquest and diplomatic arrangements with local rulers, recognizing futility of resistance against superior nomadic military capabilities. Archaeological evidence from regional centers reveals varying patterns of political transition, some locations showing minimal destruction layers, followed by gradual administrative changes, others revealing systematic siege operations and subsequent reconstruction under direct Hephthalite authority. These variations reflect sophisticated political strategies adapting to local conditions while maintaining overall territorial control objectives. The establishment of tribute relationships with subordinate Indian rulers represented significant adaptation of traditional nomadic political practices to accommodate complex hierarchical structures characteristic of Indian political prives. Organization. Administrative documents preserved in later Sanskrit sources describe elaborate ceremonial procedures for tribute presentation. Seasonal festivals, where subordinate rulers demonstrated loyalty through gifts of precious goods. Military service commitments, participation in religious ceremonies, legitimizing Hephthalite authority according to Indian political traditions. Specialized buildings, designed to accommodate large assemblies and display wealth accumulated through tribute collection. Mihirakula's succession around 515 AD brought renewed military pressure against remaining Gupta territories as the new ruler sought to complete conquest of northern India through systematic campaigns against empires remaining strongholds. Archaeological evidence from his reign reveals significant military innovations, including development of combined arms tactics that integrated traditional Hephthalite cavalry with Indian infantry formations and war elephant units captured from defeated enemies. Workshop complexes show evidence of weapons production, combining nomadic metallurgical techniques with Indian steelworking expertise, producing superior equipment, enhancing Hephthalite military effectiveness. Picture Mihirakula. The sources describe him as fierce, ambitious, determined to surpass even Toramana's conquests. He'd grown up watching his predecessor establish Hephthalite power across northwestern India. He'd learned Indian warfare methods through years of campaigning, and he possessed vision of Empire, extending from Central Asia to the Gangetic Plain territorial scope, rivaling the great empires of antiquity. The conquest of Malwa, around 520 AD, represented culmination of Hephthalite expansion into central India, bringing territorial control to its maximum geographical extent. Archaeological excavations at Ujjain and other Malwan centers reveal systematic urban reconstruction, incorporating both administrative requirements and symbolic demonstrations of political authority. The famous astronomical observatory at Ujjain continued to function under Hephthalite patronage, with construction phases adding new facilities while maintaining site's traditional role in Indian mathematical and astronomical scholarship, sophisticated cultural policies, preserving intellectual traditions while asserting political control through architectural patronage. The administrative integration of conquered Indian territories required development of hybrid governmental systems, accommodating both nomadic and Indian political traditions. Specialized administrative complexes featuring separate facilities for different cultural communities. Traditional Indian courtrooms operating according to Dharmashastra legal principles alongside nomadic judicial procedures for resolving disputes involving Hephthalite personnel. Treasury facilities incorporated both traditional Indian accounting methods and nomadic tribute collection procedures, creating comprehensive systems for managing diverse economic resources of the expanded territorial state. But even as the Hephthalites reached their maximum territorial extent, controlling territories from Central Asia through Afghanistan to northern India, extracting tribute from Sassanid Persia, dominating Silk Road trade routes, the seeds of their eventual destruction were already germinating. The very success that made them powerful created vulnerabilities that enemies would eventually exploit. Territorial overextension, strained administrative capabilities. The vast distances between Balkh and Mathura, between Bamiyan and Ujjain, made coordinated governance increasingly difficult. Local officials enjoyed considerable autonomy. By necessity, they were too far from central authority for constant oversight. This autonomy created opportunities for corruption, for local power building, for the gradual erosion of central control. The semi-sedentary adaptation that had enabled territorial conquest also reduced military mobility that had historically been nomadic peoples' primary advantage. Permanent urban quarters, agricultural investments, craft workshops, these created wealth, but also created targets that couldn't be easily abandoned during military crises. The Hephthalites were becoming what they'd conquered, a territorial empire, with all the strengths and weaknesses such systems entailed. And succession disputes the endemic problem of nomadic confederations, where leadership, legitimacy often remained contested, began emerging as Mihirakula's reign progressed. Different Hephthalite lineages claimed precedence. Regional commanders built personal followings. The unified political structure that had enabled conquest began fragmenting into competing factions. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals competing royal burial complexes, indicating multiple claimants to supreme authority, conflicting administrative orders, overlapping jurisdictions preventing coordinated defensive planning. Meanwhile, new threats were emerging on Hephthalite frontiers. In the east, the Western Turk Khaganate was coalescing a nomadic confederation that would prove even more formidable than the Hephthalites at their peak. And in Persia, a new king was rising who'd spent decades studying the mistakes that led to Peroz's disaster, who understood that nomadic power could be broken not through frontal assault, but through systematic coordination with other enemies. The balance of power that had favored the Hephthalites for half a century was shifting, and they were too internally divided, too territorially overextended, too absorbed in administering their vast empire to recognize the mortal danger coalescing against them until it was too late. By the 540s, archaeological evidence from major Hephthalite centers reveals declining investment in infrastructure maintenance, irrigation systems showing neglect, defensive fortifications requiring emergency repairs, urban facilities displaying reduced construction activity compared to prosperous decades of early 6th century. The Confederation's financial difficulties prevented effective military recruitment and equipment maintenance while creating internal dissatisfaction that external enemies would exploit through propaganda and diplomatic inducements. For defection, simultaneously, the Western Turk Khaganate was emerging as unified military force in eastern steppes that represented fundamentally different threat than anything Hephthalites had previously encountered. Archaeological evidence from Turkic burial sites reveals sophisticated metallurgical capabilities, standardized military equipment, burial practices, indicating centralized political authority extending across vast territories, from Altai Mountains to Caspian Sea region. Unlike earlier nomadic confederations relying primarily on traditional tribal leadership structures, the Turk Khaganate had developed institutional mechanisms for coordinating military operations across multiple tribal groups while maintaining unified command structures, executing complex strategic plans over extended time periods. The initial Turk probes into Hephthalite territory began around 545 AD, with systematic raids against outlying settlements and tribute collection points along Confederation's eastern frontiers. Destruction patterns, consistent with highly mobile cavalry forces employing superior tactical coordination, burned storage facilities, scattered defensive equipment, evidence of rapid withdrawal preventing effective Hephthalite counterattacks. The Turk forces demonstrated particular expertise in disrupting communication networks and supply lines, targeting administrative infrastructure that had enabled Hephthalite territorial control rather than attempting direct confrontation with major defensive installations. The psychological impact was devastating if even the tribute collection system could be disrupted. If communications between regional centers could be severed, what confidence could subordinate populations have in Hephthalite protection? Simultaneously, the Sassanid Empire, under Khosrow I, had recovered from catastrophic defeats of previous century through systematic military reforms and territorial reorganization. Archaeological evidence from Sassanid military installations reveals extensive rearmament programs, incorporating technological innovations learned from previous conflicts with nomadic forces, improved cavalry equipment, enhanced siege warfare capabilities, logistical systems designed to support extended campaigns in Central Asian terrain conditions. The Persian recovery coincided with internal Hephthalite weaknesses, creating unprecedented opportunities for reversing territorial losses sustained during Peroz's reign. The formation of the crucial Turco-Sassanid alliance emerged from pragmatic strategic calculations rather than cultural affinity or ideological compatibility. Both powers recognized Hephthalite territorial control represented obstacles to their respective expansion objectives. Turks seeking access to Central Asian trade routes and settled territories, Persians aiming to restore traditional authority over Transoxiana and eliminate tribute obligations imposed following earlier defeats. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic installations along Caspian Sea region reveals construction of specialized facilities designed to accommodate negotiations between these unlikely partners, neutral meeting grounds, secure communication networks, enabling coordination despite vast cultural differences. Picture the diplomatic complexity. Sassanid officials with centuries of imperial administrative tradition negotiating with Turkic tribal leaders whose political organization remained fundamentally nomadic. Zoroastrian Persian ceremonial requirements versus traditional Turkic leadership protocols. The challenges of finding common language, common ceremonial ground, common strategic objectives. That such different civilizations could coordinate effectively demonstrates both the severity of Hephthalite threat and the sophistication of diplomatic mechanisms both powers developed. The military coordination aspects required detailed strategic planning, accounting for geographical obstacles separating Turkic and Persian operational theaters, along with timing requirements for coordinated attacks, preventing Hephthalite forces from concentrating defensive efforts. Archaeological evidence from staging areas reveals systematic preparations beginning in 552 AD. Persian forces establishing forward supply bases near Amu Darya, while Turkic armies assembled in Fergana Valley region. Specialized equipment for siege warfare, extensive provisions for extended campaigns, communication systems designed to maintain coordination across vast distances. The intelligence sharing arrangements provided both powers with detailed information about Hephthalite military capabilities, defensive installations, internal political developments that could be exploited during coordinated operations, specialized equipment for rapid long-distance communication, secure document storage facilities, safe houses, accommodating operatives, traveling between allied powers, sophistication, indicating systematic intelligence, cooperation, extending beyond simple military alliance toward comprehensive strategic coordination, anticipating Hephthalite responses to coordinated pressure. The first major coordinated offensive began in 557 AD with simultaneous Turkic attacks against Hephthalite positions in Sogdiana, while Persian forces launched systematic operations against territories north of Amu Darya. The devastating effectiveness of coordinated pressure applied from multiple directions. Hephthalite defensive installations showing evidence of hasty abandonment rather than sustained resistance. Speed of Allied advances, preventing effective Hephthalite military coordination. Isolated garrisons unable to provide mutual support while facing superior enemy forces equipped with advanced siege capabilities. The Siege of Bukhara represented first major urban center to fall to coordinated Allied offensive, demonstrating effectiveness of combined Turkic mobility and Persian siege expertise. Archaeological excavations reveal systematic siege operations employing both traditional Persian artillery techniques and Turkic innovations in rapid assault methods. The city's defensive walls show impact damage from coordinated bombardments, while internal structures reveal systematic looting, followed by administrative reorganization under Allied occupation. The rapid fall of this crucial commercial center disrupted Hephthalite trade networks, while providing allies with substantial economic resources for continuing military operations. Internal Hephthalite weaknesses became increasingly apparent as military pressure intensified. Succession disputes that had simmered during periods of external security erupted into open civil conflict when unified leadership became essential for survival. Competing royal burial complexes indicating multiple claimants to supreme authority, different factions controlling separate territories and military resources, administrative documents showing conflicting orders and overlapping jurisdictions, preventing coordinated defensive planning. The Allies exploited internal divisions through diplomatic manipulation and selective military pressure, offering terms to regional Hephthalite commanders willing to defect, targeting territories controlled by specific factions, exacerbating existing tensions through calculated propaganda. The overextension of Hephthalite territorial control had created administrative burdens, exceeding organizational capabilities during sustained military pressure. Systematic abandonment of outlying settlements and tribute collection points as resources concentrated for defending core territories. The withdrawal from marginal areas eliminated crucial sources of military manpower and economic resources, while creating power vacuums Allied forces exploited for establishing forward bases and disrupting remaining Hephthalite communication networks. Economic pressures resulting from sustained military operations and reduced tribute collection created cascading effects throughout Hephthalite territories. Urban centers showing declining commercial activity, reduced investment in infrastructure maintenance, decreased imports of luxury goods, evidence of emergency taxation measures disrupting traditional economic relationships. The Confederation's financial difficulties prevented effective military recruitment and equipment maintenance, while creating internal dissatisfaction that Allied forces exploited through propaganda and diplomatic inducements for defection. The systematic dismantling of Hephthalite power proceeded through coordinated campaigns targeting crucial infrastructure rather than attempting total territorial occupation. Turkic forces specialized in disrupting communication networks and eliminating isolated strongholds, while Persian armies focused on capturing major urban centers and establishing permanent administrative control over conquered territories. This division of tactical responsibilities maximized effectiveness of each ally's military capabilities while preventing resource expenditure required for comprehensive territorial occupation by either power alone. The 563 AD campaign marked decisive phase with coordinated advances, eliminating remaining Hephthalite strongholds in Bactria and Sogdiana through systematic siege operations. Archaeological evidence reveals overwhelming superiority of Allied forces. Hephthalite defensive positions showing rapid collapse rather than prolonged resistance. Weapon distributions indicating substantial disparities in equipment quality and tactical coordination. Allied forces employing standardized weapons and coordinated formations against increasingly desperate Hephthalite defenders, equipped with obsolete equipment and lacking effective command structures. Picture the final campaigns. Hephthalite garrisons watching Allied armies approach, understanding no relief is coming because regional commanders are either fighting their own battles or have already defected. Defenders with deteriorating equipment, facing enemies with superior weapons, isolated strongholds falling one by one as coordinated Allied pressure prevents mutual support. The systematic elimination of everything the Hephthalites had built over a century of conquest and consolidation. The capture of Balkh in 565 AD eliminated last major Hephthalite administrative center and effectively ended their existence as independent political entity. Systematic destruction of royal installations and administrative facilities, followed by comprehensive reorganization under Persian authority. The Persian occupation involved selective preservation of economic infrastructure, while eliminating political symbols associated with Hephthalite authority. Systematic planning for long-term territorial integration rather than simple military occupation. Treasury facilities showing evidence of substantial wealth confiscation. Empty vault chambers scattered precious metal fragments indicating systematic looting of accumulated tribute resources. The partition arrangements between allied powers reflected respective strategic priorities and territorial capabilities. Turks receiving control over northern territories, providing access to steppe regions and nomadic populations. Persians assuming authority over southern areas, including major urban centers and agricultural regions. Systematic surveying operations established clear territorial boundaries, along with construction of administrative installations designed to prevent future disputes over jurisdictional authority. Provisions for continued cooperation in suppressing any attempts at Hephthalite political restoration. The final defeat represented more than simple military conquest. It encompassed systematic elimination of political institutions, cultural practices, economic networks that had sustained Hephthalite territorial empire for over a century, deliberate destruction of royal burial complexes, administrative archives, religious installations associated with Hephthalite authority, systematic efforts preventing future political revival through elimination of legitimizing symbols and institutional continuity. The thoroughness suggests coordinated planning between allied powers, ensuring permanent elimination of Hephthalite political potential. Yet even as Turco-Sassanid forces systematically destroyed Hephthalite's central authority, fragments of their political structure, cultural traditions, administrative innovations would survive in successor kingdoms that emerged throughout former territories. The Hephthalite political model, combining nomadic military effectiveness with sophisticated territorial administration, had proven too valuable to disappear entirely, and the lessons they'd learned about governing diverse populations, controlling trade routes, balancing military power with cultural tolerance, would influence Central Asian political development for centuries after their empire's destruction. The systematic destruction of Hephthalite central authority following Turco-Sassanid conquest did not result in complete elimination of nomadic political structures throughout former confederation's vast territories. Archaeological evidence from sites across Tokharistan reveals emergence of localized power centers during 570s, where surviving Hephthalite nobles and military commanders established independent kingdoms, maintaining traditional administrative practices while adapting to new political realities imposed by former enemies' territorial partition. Excavations at Kunduz uncovered palace complexes dating to this transitional period, incorporating distinctly Hephthalite architectural elements. Throne rooms with traditional nomadic ceremonial arrangements, treasury facilities designed according to established tribute collection procedures, conscious efforts preserving institutional continuity despite collapse of unified political authority. The fragmentation process accelerated as Persian and Turkic administrative control proved insufficient for managing complex cultural and economic systems developed under Hephthalite rule. Vast distances separating major administrative centers from new imperial capitals created communication delays, preventing effective oversight of local developments, while cultural differences between conquering powers and newly acquired populations generated resistance, requiring constant military tension. Systematic withdrawal from outlying territories, as both Persian and Turkic authorities concentrated resources on securing core regions, providing maximum economic and strategic value while abandoning marginal areas to local control. Tokharistan emerged as most significant region for Hephthalite political survival. Mountainous terrain, providing natural defensive advantages, complicating external military intervention, while position along crucial trade routes ensured continued economic viability. Local nobility maintained extensive kinship networks throughout Hindu Kush region, creating political foundations supporting independent territorial control when central authority collapsed. Systematic fortification of existing installations during late 6th century, with defensive improvements incorporating lessons learned from recent military disasters while adapting traditional nomadic military architecture to requirements. of territorial defense against superior enemy forces. The establishment of Tokharistan's successor kingdom required careful negotiation with various tribal groups and urban populations, previously acknowledging Hephthalite authority through different political arrangements. Continuation of established governmental procedures, including tribute collection systems, maintaining traditional payment schedules, legal frameworks, preserving customary practices for resolving disputes between different cultural communities, systematic adaptation of existing bureaucratic structures, accommodating reduced territorial scope while maintaining essential governmental functions, taxation, military recruitment, diplomatic communication with neighboring powers. The rulers adopted modified royal titles, acknowledging reduced political status while asserting continuity with Hephthalite imperial traditions. Coin issues, featuring royal portraits, maintaining traditional Hephthalite iconographic elements, fire altar symbols, nomadic royal regalia, while incorporating new design elements, reflecting contemporary political realities. Continued access to precious metals through trade, relationships, and local mining operations, indicating kingdoms maintained sufficient economic resources, supporting royal ceremonial requirements and military expenditures, despite territorial losses and reduced tribute income. The Kapisa region developed distinct successor kingdom under leaders, claiming direct descent from prominent Hephthalite royal lineages, while adapting political organization to accommodate specific geographical and cultural conditions of reduced territories. Administrative complexes demonstrating sophisticated understanding of territorial administration requirements. Specialized facilities for managing trade relationships with Indian territories. Defensive installations protecting crucial mountain passes from potential invasion attempts. Architectural style incorporating traditional Hephthalite design elements with local adaptations reflecting kingdom's position as bridge between Central Asian and Indian cultural spheres. Kapisa rulers maintained extensive diplomatic relationships with various Indian kingdoms, previously paying tribute to Hephthalite authority, negotiating new political arrangements, preserving beneficial commercial relationships while acknowledging changed power dynamics. Continuation of established ceremonial procedures for receiving foreign embassies with reception halls, accommodating traditional Indian diplomatic protocols alongside adapted Hephthalite royal ceremonies. These arrangements enabled Kapisa Kingdom maintaining crucial role in trans-regional trade networks, while providing political legitimacy through recognition by established Indian political authorities. Military organization reflected practical requirements of defending mountainous territories with limited manpower resources against potentially superior enemy forces. Systematic adaptation of traditional Hephthalite cavalry techniques to terrain conditions favoring defensive operations over mobile warfare. Training facilities showing evidence of specialized instruction in mountain warfare techniques. Use of fortified positions, coordinated archery tactics, rapid movement through difficult terrain, maximizing defensive advantages while compensating for numerical inferiority against potential invaders. The emergence of Nezek dynasty represented perhaps most successful attempt, establishing legitimate Hephthalite political continuity through claims of direct royal descent and systematic preservation of traditional governmental institutions. Comprehensive efforts maintaining established bureaucratic procedures, preservation of administrative archives, continuation of standardized measurement systems, operation of mint facilities producing coins conforming to traditional Hephthalite design standards. Dynasty's territorial control extended across strategic regions, including crucial trade routes and defensive positions, providing economic resources and military advantages, enabling sustained independence despite external political pressure. Nezek diplomatic policies emphasized legitimate succession to Hephthalite imperial authority, while pragmatically acknowledging political realities limiting territorial scope and military capabilities. systematic efforts maintaining relationships with former Hephthalite tributary states and allied tribal confederations, offering reduced tribute obligations in exchange for continued political recognition and military cooperation agreements. These arrangements enabled Nezak rulers maintaining influence beyond direct territorial control while building coalition relationships, providing mutual defense against external threats from Persian or Turkic forces. Religious policies within successor kingdoms reflected careful balance between maintaining traditional practices, legitimizing political authority, and accommodating diverse religious communities, providing essential population support. Continued patronage of Buddhist monasteries, alongside support for Zoroastrian fire temples and local cult practices, comprehensive religious tolerance, designed maintaining social stability while preserving political legitimacy through traditional ceremonial observances. Construction projects, adding defensive elements to existing religious facilities, reflecting integration of spiritual and military considerations characterizing frontier political organization. The persistence of Hephthalite cultural influences throughout northern India during 7th century occurred through continuation of established administrative practices and commercial relationships rather than direct political control. Continued presence of Central Asian merchant communities, maintaining cultural connections with Hephthalite successor states, while adapting to changing political conditions under emerging Indian regional kingdoms. These communities preserve traditional crafts, religious practices, commercial techniques developed under Hephthalite rule, while serving as intermediaries between Indian territories and Central Asian political entities. Local rulers throughout Punjab and Kashmir maintained political arrangements, acknowledging historical connections to Hephthalite authority, while establishing new relationships with emerging regional powers. Continuation of administrative practices developed under Hephthalite rule, taxation systems, legal procedures, military organization techniques proven effective for managing diverse populations and complex territorial arrangements. Coin issues from local rulers, often incorporating design elements derived from Hephthalite imperial iconography, while adding new symbols reflecting contemporary political relationships and cultural influences. But even as successor kingdoms struggled to maintain fragments of Hephthalite political traditions, a new threat was emerging that would ultimately eliminate even these remnants. The expansion of the Arab Caliphate into Central Asian territories during late 7th and early 8th centuries. The Islamic conquest represented fundamentally different challenge compared to earlier Turkic and Persian interventions. Arab forces brought comprehensive religious and administrative systems demanding total transformation of existing political arrangements, rather than simple acknowledgement of new overlord authority. The first significant encounters between Arab forces and Hephthalite successor kingdoms occurred along Amu Darya region during 670 S, when Arab commanders began systematic probing operations, assessing military capabilities and political organization of potential conquest targets. Archaeological evidence reveals continued effectiveness of traditional Hephthalite military techniques when employed in defensive operations. Battlefield distributions showing successful cavalry charges and coordinated archery tactics, inflicting substantial casualties on Arab forces despite superior numbers and equipment. However, tactical successes proved insufficient, preventing gradual Arab territorial gains through systematic siege operations and diplomatic inducements for local defection. The Islamic administrative systems imposed in conquered territories represented comprehensive transformation of existing governmental structures rather than simple overlay of new authority. Systematic replacement of traditional Hephthalite administrative facilities with new installations designed according to Islamic governmental principles. Construction of mosques, Islamic legal courts, taxation centers operating according to Islamic law rather than traditional Central Asian customary practices. The thoroughness indicates systematic planning for permanent cultural transformation rather than temporary military occupation. Conversion pressures applied to Hephthalite successor populations varied according to social status and perceived political reliability. Ruling elites facing demands for immediate religious conversion, while common populations generally received gradual inducements toward Islamic adoption through economic incentives and social advantages. Systematic destruction of traditional religious installations in some regions, while other areas show gradual transformation, preserving existing structures while adapting functions to Islamic requirements. Buddhist monasteries particularly faced systematic elimination or conversion to Islamic educational institutions, deliberate efforts eliminating competing religious authority, supporting political resistance. The resistance strategies employed by surviving Hephthalite successor states included both military opposition and diplomatic efforts, exploiting divisions within expanding Islamic empire, while maintaining independence through strategic alliances with other threatened regional powers. Systematic coordination between various Central Asian kingdoms, sharing common interests in preventing Islamic conquest. Exchange of military advisors, coordinated defensive planning, mutual support agreements, providing resources for sustained resistance operations. The gradual Islamic conquest of former Hephthalite territories proceeded through systematic campaigns, combining military pressure with diplomatic inducements and economic incentives, encouraging voluntary submission rather than costly siege. Operations, varying patterns of political transition. Some regions showing negotiated surrender, preserving local administrative structures under Islamic oversight. Others revealing systematic destruction, followed by comprehensive reorganization according to Islamic governmental principles. These variations reflected both local resistance capabilities and Islamic strategic priorities, emphasizing efficient territorial integration over total cultural transformation. The final elimination of independent Hephthalite successor states occurred during early 8th century as Islamic forces completed conquest of Central Asian territories through systematic campaigns, eliminating remaining centers of political resistance. The last independent strongholds revealed desperate defensive preparations, construction of emergency fortifications, stockpiling of weapons and supplies, implementation of scorched earth policies, denying resources to advancing Islamic forces. Archaeological record shows fierce resistance, extracting substantial costs from Islamic forces, while ultimately proving insufficient, preventing conquest and political absorption into expanding Islamic empire. The systematic destruction of last independent Hephthalite strongholds marked end of their political existence, yet their contributions to Central Asian development continued influencing regional political structures long after military defeat. The administrative innovations pioneered by Hephthalite rulers became foundational elements for subsequent nomadic confederations throughout steppes, particularly their sophisticated tribute collection systems and territorial administration techniques, balancing nomadic mobility with sedentary governmental requirements. Archaeological evidence from later Turkic and Mongol administrative centers reveals architectural layouts and bureaucratic procedures directly descended from Hephthalite institutional models. Specialized treasury facilities, standardized measurement systems, diplomatic reception protocols, facilitating complex international relationships across vast geographical distances. The Hephthalite approach to governing diverse populations through flexible administrative arrangements, accommodating different cultural traditions while maintaining central political authority, provided crucial precedents for later nomadic Rus empires. Policies of selective cultural preservation, religious tolerance, economic integration created governmental frameworks that subsequent Central Asian rulers adapted to their own territorial circumstances. The Turk Khaganate, despite its role destroying Hephthalite power, adopted numerous administrative techniques proven effective for managing sedentary populations and commercial networks. Turkic administrative centers revealed document storage systems, legal procedures, taxation methods closely paralleling Hephthalite practices, systematic adoption of proven governmental technologies rather than complete institutional innovation. The influence extended beyond immediate successors to shape political development of later nomadic confederations, including Mongol Empire, whose administrative structures incorporated elements traceable through intermediate stages back Hephthalite innovations. Mongol system of decimal military organization, standardized communication networks, religious tolerance policies reflected institutional evolution building upon foundations established during Hephthalite period. Mongol administrative sites reveal architectural elements and bureaucratic procedures, maintaining continuity with earlier Central Asian governmental traditions. Persistence of effective institutional solutions across multiple political transitions and cultural transformations. The Hephthalite contribution to nomadic political theory involved systematic development of territorial administration concepts, transcending traditional tribal organization while maintaining essential nomadic cultural values. Their governmental structures demonstrated nomadic societies could successfully manage complex territorial states without abandoning fundamental cultural identity or military advantages. This synthesis influenced political thinking throughout steppes for centuries, providing conceptual frameworks, enabling later nomadic confederations, establishing stable territorial control while preserving mobility and flexibility, historically characterizing steppe societies. Buddhist artistic traditions throughout Central Asia and northern India bore lasting Hephthalite influences, continuing to shape regional cultural development long after political disappearance. Distinctive sculptural styles emerging under Hephthalite patronage combined traditional Buddhist iconography with Central Asian nomadic motifs, creating artistic synthesis influencing subsequent Buddhist art production throughout region. Sculptural programs at major Buddhist centers, maintaining stylistic elements pioneered during nomadic rule. Warrior imagery, horse motifs, decorative patterns, reflecting cultural fusion, achieved under Hephthalite artistic patronage. The Gondaran artistic tradition experienced particularly significant Hephthalite influence through systematic patronage of Buddhist monasteries and sculptural projects, incorporating nomadic aesthetic preferences with established Greco-Buddhist artistic traditions. Relief sculptures from major Gandharan sites dating to Hephthalite period demonstrate sophisticated artistic synthesis, combining classical Mediterranean sculptural techniques with Indian Buddhist narrative traditions and Central Asian decorative motif. These artistic innovations created distinctive regional styles, continuing to influence Buddhist art production throughout Afghanistan, Pakistan, northern India, for centuries after Hephthalite political authority ended. The monumental Buddhist installations at Bamiyan represented perhaps most significant artistic legacy of Hephthalite cultural patronage. The famous colossal Buddha statues received substantial investment and architectural enhancement during nomadic period construction phases, adding elaborate monastery complexes, pilgrim accommodation facilities, defensive installations, transforming site into major regional religious center. Artistic program incorporated traditional Buddhist iconography with architectural innovations, reflecting Hephthalite engineering capabilities and aesthetic preferences, creating monuments serving as pilgrimage destinations and cultural symbols for centuries following end of nomadic rule. The role of Hephthalite territories as crucial intermediaries in Silk Road cultural transmission created lasting impacts on transcontinental intellectual and technological exchange, extending far beyond political existence. Strategic control over mountain passes and trade routes facilitated systematic cultural interaction between East Asian, Indian, Persian, Mediterranean civilizations during crucial period of technological and intellectual development, systematic exchange of ideas, techniques, cultural practices, occurring under Hephthalite administration, transmission of papermaking technology, astronomical knowledge, mathematical concepts, religious ideas shaping intellectual development throughout known world. Buddhist philosophical and scholarly traditions benefited particularly from Hephthalite, support for monastic institutions, serving as centers for intellectual exchange between different cultural traditions. Monastery complexes patronized by Hephthalite rulers attracted scholars from throughout Buddhist world, creating environments where Indian philosophical traditions encountered Chinese intellectual approaches, Central Asian cultural practices, Persian scholarly methods, library facilities, manuscript copying workshops, scholarly residence quarters, supported systematic intellectual exchange and knowledge preservation activities, continuing to influence Buddhist scholarship long after nomadic period ended. The linguistic influences of Hephthalite rule created lasting impacts on development of regional languages throughout Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, persisting long after political disappearance. Iranian linguistic substrate characterizing Hephthalite administration contributed vocabulary, grammatical structures, phonological patterns to local languages, continuing to evolve under subsequent political authorities. Modern linguistic analysis reveals Hephthalite loanwords and grammatical influences in contemporary languages throughout former territories, depth of cultural integration occurring during period of political dominance. The Hephthalite legacy ultimately represents one of most successful examples of nomadic adaptation to challenges of governing complex territorial states while maintaining distinctive cultural identity and military effectiveness. Political innovations, administrative achievements, cultural synthesis, economic systems provided foundations for subsequent Central Asian development, influencing regional civilization for centuries after political disappearance. Modern scholarship continues, revealing sophistication and lasting significance of their contributions to world history, demonstrating the Hephthalites deserve recognition as major civilizational innovators, whose achievements shaped development of medieval Eurasia in fundamental and lasting ways. Subscribe to Colossus of Empires for more epic journeys through history's forgotten empires that changed our world.